Magic challenges the assumptions that we have about what is or isn't possible, and I find shock magic particularly interesting because it affects a unique range of emotions. Now, in the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you the result of an obsession of mine. It's a new take on the classic needle swallowing effect, a bizarre performance piece I call a single needle. Welcome. Chico, California. I grew up here. It's a small town north of San Francisco, populated by an eclectic mix of college students, farmers, and artists. I learned at a young age how powerful magic can be in a small town. Later on tonight, I've invited a small audience right here to a place called Monk's, a popular wine bar and lounge in the heart of downtown Chico. We're going to enjoy a glass of wine, maybe 3, and if all goes well, a special dessert. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining me here tonight. Tonight, I'm going to show you something that I find, well, strange. But in order to do this, I need someone to help out. What's your name?
Angela.
Angela?
Yeah.
Would you be willing to help?
Of course.
Let's give Angela a round of applause. Come on up. You can set your wine down there. I have a very important question to ask you. Your answer to this question will determine whether or not this trick will work. So no pressure.
Okay.
Do you like cherries?
Yes.
Good news. We can do the trick. That was the correct answer.
Okay.
Thank you. I have some cherries here. I'm going to take a couple. You take a couple also. And we're going to hold one in each hand. And I just want you to do what I do. All right?
Okay.
So the first cherry. A little more enthusiasm.
I'm not pulling this out of my eye.
You won't have to. Bon appetit. Very good. The second cherry. Let's try that again, Angela. Very good. Here we go. This one we just wet. Oh, you're good. You're good. You're good. I'm just joking. We are going to eat it. What's important are the stems. We're going to leave the stems sticking out like this. Perfect. Come here. Is this not the strangest thing you've done today?
Yeah. Nothing.
Tying 2 cherry stems into a knot is difficult. Tonight, though, I'm going to try something a little bit more complicated. Stuck inside of this cherry are 40 very real and very sharp sewing needles. You don't have to eat this cherry.
I wouldn't.
Very carefully, I want you to reach in there and pull one of those out. Take a look at it. It is real. It is sharp.
Yeah.
I also have some string. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to take that needle and place it on my tongue. Notice I did not say in my tongue. That's a different trick. I don't do that one. Can you do that for me? Are you comfortable just laying that right on my tongue?
Yeah, does it matter which way?
It doesn't matter which way, just not down.
Okay, we're good.
Okay.
I got you.
Take a deep breath. That was fast. Let's just, let's take a deeper breath. Nothing in the glass but water and cucumber.
Yeah.
I know this is strange, but I want you to look on top of my tongue. Look in the very back by the little, the what? The dingly thing. That's the dingly thing. Look at the roof.
Okay.
Beneath, the gums, gone.
Yeah, there's no needle.
It gets a little bit easier. Sewing thread. Are you right-handed or left-handed?
Right.
Hold out your finger just like this. I'm going to wrap this right around your finger. Not too tight though. That's not too tight, is it?
No, it's fine.
Okay. Hold it just like that. Have you ever been fishing before?
Yes.
Good.
Oh God.
Hold it just like this. Don't move.
Don't pull too hard.
I'm not moving.
And take a look. You can see, if you look closely, that it's not just threaded. It's actually tied onto the string. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you. That's yours to keep. Let's give her a round of applause.
Well, Wayne basically pulled out a real needle, put it on his own tongue, and swallowed some thread and pulled it back out. I have no idea how he did that.
This guy is absolutely off the charts. I have to say that I saw some stuff tonight that it's hard to believe.
It was awesome. It was amazing.
Hell no, I wouldn't swallow a needle. That's stupid.
Does he have a little needle compartment? I mean, in his mouth? I mean, where's that go?
I was thinking he had a very, very happy wife. That's what I was like, that guy has some skill.
When the needle got out, it was tied to the string. Absolutely amazing. I know if I tried to do that, it wouldn't work and I'd probably end up in the hospital. But no, I had no idea how he did it.
A single needle was born from the desire to have a version of the classic needle swallowing effect that could be performed in close-up, casual situations, and it's quite effective. But after spending more than a decade performing a full stage version using 40 needles, I wondered how this new version would play in front of a larger audience. Tonight, we're going to find out as I present my show Moments of Insanity at Feather Falls Casino in Northern California. I'd like to show you something that I find strange, but in order to do this, I'm going to need someone to come up and help me out. What's your name?
Emily.
Emily, would you be willing to help?
Sure.
Let's give Emily a round of applause. Don't move. Stuck inside of this cherry are 40 very real and very sharp sewing needles. Carefully reach in there and pull one of those out for me, but do be careful. I want you to take a look at it, make sure it's real, make sure it's sharp, but do not poke yourself. I also have some thread. Do you sew at all? A little bit? Okay. I want you to listen to me very carefully. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to take that needle and place it on my tongue. Can you do that for me? Can you lay that carefully right on my tongue? Nothing left in the glass. I want you to look on top of my tongue. Look in the back of the little, the what?
Uvula.
Uvula? By the tonsils, the lung. Look by the lung. Look beneath the tongue. Gums, gone. It gets a little easier. Sewing string. Are you right-handed or left-handed?
Right-handed.
Hold out your finger, your right finger, just like this. I'm going to wrap this right around your finger, just a little bit, not too tightly though. That's not too tight, is it? No? That's comfortable. Put your thumb right there so you hold it so it doesn't come unraveled. Good. Have you ever been fishing before?
Once.
Once. Good enough. And if you look closely, you will see that it's not just threaded on, that's actually tied onto the string, and that's my gift to you. Thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure. Over the past couple of years, I've performed a single needle in smaller theaters all over the world, but I had no idea how it would play in a larger space. We did decide to use live video during the performance, but we heard from people sitting in the balcony that as soon as that needle came out of my mouth and the light hit it, they were able to see it. It was very cool. When I was 11 or 12, I picked up a biography on Harry Houdini written by Ken Silverman. And in the book, there's a photograph of Houdini on stage performing the East Indian Needle Mystery. It fascinated me. It's a great photo. Unlike card tricks or coin tricks, this was something that seemed real. And needle swallow was the first magic effect that I was ever really obsessed with. I had to learn how it was done. And when I was 12, I started performing a version that I'd created using toothpicks. It's actually kind of interesting. I used to eat dried spaghetti as a snack because I was a weird kid. So what I did is I would ask a volunteer to take a few toothpicks and break them in half. I would take them back, but I would switch them for dried spaghetti. And at a distance, the dried pasta looked exactly like the toothpicks. I would eat them, swallow them. I would then swallow a piece of string, and then pull out another piece of string that had toothpicks tied onto it. At the time, this was the only thing that I performed that people really believed, that didn't seem like it was a trick. And eventually I started using real needles instead of toothpicks. And over the years, I slowly developed my own version of the classic effect. It's a version that I've performed all around the world. In 2010, I was preparing for a series of television performances in the Dominican Republic, along with the rest of the Curiosidades team. And I decided that I wanted to find some way to perform the needle swallowing effect in that kind of situation. Now, my full stage version uses 60 needles, and it's a 12-minute routine. So I began to explore the idea of just using one needle, and after a lot of experimentation, I found a method. And what's exciting and unique about this version is that the string never leaves sight. It's almost as if the volunteer fishes the needle out. The thread stays wrapped around their finger throughout the entire process. And I remember one of the first people that I showed this to was Aaron Fisher. I performed it for him. He liked it, and he commented on how gross I was. I never did perform this in the Dominican Republic, but in 2012 I did put it into my show, Moments of Insanity, and I'm excited to share it. Before we jump into a full explanation, I want to give you a brief overview of how this works. In performance, it looks like I take a needle and swallow it. But of course I don't actually swallow it, because that would be stupid and dangerous. But we'll talk about that in a few minutes. It then looks like I take a piece of string, wrap it around a volunteer's finger, swallow the string, and together we fish the needle out. Here's what really happens. Unwrapping the string pulls a hidden needle up into my hand. I break the thread and secretly position that needle so that it's hidden behind my thumb and forefinger. Now, because the needle's not tied onto the string, I can slide it like this, and this creates the impression that besides the string, my hands are empty. I take this end here and I wrap it around my volunteer's finger. Then I slide the needle to the other end, where I've secretly tied 2 knots. Now they're small and you can barely see them, and one of them is much smaller than the other. Giving the needle a quick tug like this causes it to pop over the smaller knot, trapping it in between the 2 knots, which creates the impression that it's tied into place. But of course, all of this happens with the needle hidden between the fingers. So the needle is now secretly locked onto the string. I place it on my tongue, bring the string into my mouth, and then pull it back out and reveal it. That's a brief overview of the method. There's a lot going on, and as I'm sure you're aware, this is potentially very dangerous. So let's break it down and go through the entire routine from the beginning. I have here 2 needles. Now these are size 8 sewing needles, and this is a good size because they're small enough that they can hide between my fingers, but they're large enough for an audience to see. I also have a spool of thread. This is a custom-made spool. I made it from a cork from a very good Sierra Nevada beer. I've wrapped some string around it, and I've drilled a hole into the center. Not all the way through, just down into the center. It needs to be large enough to allow one of these needles to hide easily all the way inside. I've also taken a sharp knife and I've cut little notches along the bottom, and you can see that that allows me to lock the end of the string in position, which makes it easy to find during a performance. So the first thing I'm going to do is tie some knots. So I'm going to start by pulling off about 1.5 feet of thread, and I'm going to tie 2 knots right about here. The first knot is going to be a large one, essentially 4 knots tied right on top of each other, and then after that I'll tie a single knot, much smaller, directly in front of the large one. So let's tie the big knot first. We're going to tie a single knot here, and now we'll tie a second knot right on top of it. And this is quite difficult to do if you're doing it alone. If you do have another person that you can trust, you can ask them to pinch the knot, which will allow you to tie a second one right on top of it very easily. And we'll tie a third one. And we'll tie one last one just to be sure. 4 knots right on top of each other. This is our large knot. We're now going to tie 1 knot directly in front of it. And this can be a bit of a challenge to position it where you want it. So what we'll do is we'll use the needle. I'll start the knot here. And if I place the needle right in the center, I can tie the knot right around the needle and then slide that knot right to where I want it to be, directly in front of the larger knot that we just tied. I can pull the needle out and tighten it up. And there we are, 2 knots. One of them very large, closest to the spool, and a small knot directly in front of it. There's a little space in between, which is where the needle will end up. There it is. I'm now going to thread one of the needles onto the string. So I'll thread the needle on just like this, and I'm going to slide it down the thread until I get just about to the knot. I'm now going to wrap this around like this, and now I'm going to place that needle all the way down through that center hole, just like that. So you can see that we have the thread coming up here. There's the knot, goes through the needle, which is down in the hole, and across to the other side. You're going to hold this in place and wrap the thread around and take the end, and I'm just going to slip that right into one of those edges that I've cut to lock it into place. So this spool is now set and ready. There's a hidden needle down inside, but let's talk about the other needle. You saw in the performances that I often have a cherry with 40 needles in it, and I ask my volunteer to pick one out. This is theatrically interesting because of the contrast between the cherry and the needles. It's also easy to see at a distance. But when I perform this close-up, I'll often just have a single needle inside of a small box, or I'll even stick it in my sleeve. This is nice when I'm performing in a more casual situation. Ultimately, how I choose to display this needle depends entirely upon the situation and how I want to frame the effect. So that's the setup. Let's jump into the performance. So I begin by introducing the needle. I hand it to my volunteer and I ask them to carefully take a look at it, make sure it's real, and make sure it's sharp. While they're doing that, I pull off a piece of string and I secretly position that second needle so that it's hidden between my fingers. I hold the spool in my left hand like this. You can see the knot here. It's closest to my index finger. I place my finger directly on top of the hidden needle and I unravel the thread. When the thread gets to this point, my right hand comes in like this and lifts that needle up out of its hiding place directly behind my fingers. I now break the thread and I put this away. In a continuing action, making sure that I keep these fingers closed, I carefully lift this needle up and position it so that it's hidden between my thumb and index finger. And it's very important that the thread doesn't wrap around like this, because that will prevent the needle from sliding. So it's important that you take your time and make sure that the thread flows smoothly through the eye of the needle while it's hidden behind your finger. Now, it's natural to be nervous during this moment, but you have to remember that the audience has no idea what's going to happen. The effect is just beginning, and there's very little heat on me at this point. Now, if you choose to perform this, you will know that you're secretly positioning a hidden needle, but to the audience it will just look like you're carefully arranging the thread between your fingers. It's okay if they see you doing that. If you were really about to swallow this string in order to fish out a needle, it makes sense that you would move carefully and deliberately with every action. So take your time and make sure that the needle is positioned correctly so that it can slide easily along the string. Otherwise, you're likely to have problems later on when the heat is on you. So once the needle is in position, I slide it along the string, nice and slow. My hand looks empty. The audience has no reason to suspect that I have anything but a piece of string. And the needle ends up at the opposite end. So the needle is here and the knots are at the bottom. The stage is now set. I've introduced the major players. In the minds of the audience, now is when the effect begins. I found that part of the challenge of performing this is remaining hyper-aware of my own movements and the movements of the audience, while making it appear as if I'm relaxed and playful. The reality of the situation is that I'm about to place a needle inside my mouth. And in order to do that safely, I have to be aware of everybody's movements. A little later on, we'll discuss some alternatives to placing the needle inside my mouth. But right now, I'll walk you through my process. I begin by telling my volunteer that in a minute, I want them to take the needle and place it on my tongue. As I say this, I gauge their reaction. How they react to this information will tell me a lot about their personality. Are they shy? Are they playing along? Are they showing off for their friends? And more importantly, am I comfortable with them placing a needle in my mouth? And if I am comfortable, I proceed. I stick out my tongue and I allow them to place the needle right on it. Now, if I'm at all worried, maybe they're showing off for their friends or they have a little bit too much energy, I'll place one hand on their arm as they do this. This gives me a little bit more control over their movements. If I decide that I'm not comfortable with them placing the needle on my tongue as they're moving forward, I'll say, on second thought, maybe I should do it. I make a joke out of it and I take the needle, and then I can carefully place it in my mouth and show everyone. One way or another, the needle ends up on my tongue. Now, in a minute, I'm going to do this, and it's going to look like I swallow it, but I don't. In reality, I'm going to use my tongue to carefully position the needle right along here, right inside my gum. Watch. It looks like the needle's gone, I can ask them to look on top of my tongue, beneath my tongue, in the back. They won't see anything because right now the needle is resting right here, right inside. Now I can talk with this in position, I can drink, I can eat, but I remain hyper aware of the fact that there is a needle inside my mouth. Every movement and every decision that I make while this is here is carefully considered. Now if you want to know what this feels like, take a toothpick or even a dried piece of pasta. Break a piece off that's about the same length as a needle and put it in your mouth. I think you'll be surprised at what you find. Now this needle will stay hidden right where it is until after the performance when I can carefully remove it. So the audience now believes that I've swallowed a needle. Now we get to retrieve it. And in order to properly demonstrate this part of the effect, I'd like to introduce my wife, Fran. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Good. Hold up your finger just like this. So I've got the needle hidden here between my fingers. The knots are at this end of the string, down at the bottom. I'm going to wrap the top of the string here right around her finger. And as I do this, I'm allowing the needle to slide along the thread. And go ahead and hold that in place with your thumb. Perfect. I slide the needle all the way down the thread until it hits the knots. And at this point, I ask her a question. I say, "That's not too tight, is it?" And as I ask that, I grab the thread here and I give the needle a small controlled tug, which causes it to pop right over the small knot and end up trapped right between the two. Now this is an important moment in the routine. The audience still doesn't know what's coming. They know I've swallowed a needle, which is weird, but why? So now that I've got the string wrapped around her finger and I'm in the right position, I take a breath. I let everything that's happened up until this point sink in. When I'm ready to continue, I ask my volunteer a question. I say, "Have you ever been fishing?" This usually gets a nervous laugh, and it essentially tells the audience what's coming. I carefully lay the hidden needle right on my tongue, and I do that by placing both fingers all the way into my mouth and then letting go. And I don't rush this at all. I want to make sure that that needle is exactly where I need it to be. And the needle will stay right on my tongue as I bring the thread into my mouth, slowly getting closer and closer to my volunteer's finger. And I'll demonstrate this in just a minute. And like before, I remain hyper aware of my volunteers' actions. I want them to stay perfectly still. If they do start to move, I'll take my right hand and place it on theirs to keep them in position, and I'll make eye contact. And that's usually enough to get them to understand that they need to stay still. So when I do this, I slowly bring that thread into my mouth, making sure that the needle stays right where it is on my tongue. The thread that comes in ends up on top of the needle. I get closer and closer to my volunteer's finger, which is funny. And when I'm ready, I slowly back away, and eventually, very carefully, I allow the needle to be pulled out of my mouth. Now obviously, this is potentially a very dangerous moment because the needle is moving. Now there are two ways that the needle can come out of my mouth. I can either allow the string to pull the needle around, like this, and pull it out eye first, or I can let it come out point first. And I tend to do both, depending upon whichever feels the most comfortable at the time. Now, as the needle is being pulled from my mouth, I use my tongue and my lips to find the end of the thread so that I can hang on to it, which will allow the needle to hang. You ready?
Yeah.
Here's what it all looks like. And there it is. I display the needle, and then I say not only is it threaded onto the string, it's actually tied onto the string, and I let it hang. And of course, because the needle is trapped in between those two knots, it appears to be tied. So there it is. Now that you know how it's done, let's go back and take a look at one last performance, and I'll walk you through each moment. So this is another performance that was filmed at Feather Falls Casino, and for the purposes of this walkthrough, we'll jump right into the effect. So to start off with, I reveal the needles, and I'm going to ask my volunteer to pull one out and look at it. It's important that she and the audience understand that the needles are real and that they're sharp. Make sure it's real, make sure it's sharp, Now while she's looking at the needle, I'm going to pick up the spool, pull out the hidden needle, break the thread, and position that needle so that it's hidden behind my fingers. I then slide it to the opposite end of the string, opposite the knots, and this creates the impression that besides the string, my hands are empty. I'm going to ask you to take that needle and place it on. And I'm now preparing my volunteer to place her needle inside my mouth. In my tongue. That's a different trick. And this looks playful, and it is, but I'm studying her reaction and body Doesn't language. matter which way it goes, just not down.
That was the way I was gonna go.
Now you can do something different. It appears as if I've swallowed it, but I've carefully tucked it into my cheek so that it lays along my lower gum. And even though that needle is still in my mouth, I can swallow some water. Now I make that look effortless, but everything that I do while that needle is inside my mouth is carefully considered and purposeful.
But I want you to look on top of my tongue.
So at this point, I ask my volunteer to look on top of my tongue and beneath my tongue, and because that needle's so small, it remains hidden.
Gums? Gone. I'm going to wrap the string.
And
around
here
your
I'm
finger just a
carefully
little bit.
wrapping that string around her finger. I slide the needle down to the other end until it pops over the smaller knot, trapping it between the two. That needle is now locked into place.
Yeah, there you go.
I place both fingers inside my mouth as I lay that needle on my tongue. Now this is a playful, but also a potentially dangerous moment. As I pull that thread in, I am judging her reaction and her movement while remaining hyper-aware of both needles that are inside my mouth and their positions. And at this point, I became a bit concerned that she might move or react as I backed away. So you can see that I reach up and I hold her hand in place. I back away, allowing that needle to eventually pop out. And in this performance, you can see that I lost the end of the thread and it fell. Now obviously that's not ideal, but sometimes it happens. I just pick it up, display the needle, and continue on.
Onto the string. It's actually tied onto that string.
And there it is. That
This
is
my
a
gift
single
to you.
needle.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Now let's talk for a minute about the idea of giving the needle away as a souvenir. Most people you offer it to, they're not going to take it. But occasionally somebody will. And when that happens, I say, you know what, just to be sure it doesn't slip off, let me double knot it. And I tie a couple of knots right on top of it. This makes sure that they're not going to accidentally or purposefully find out the secret. So now let's backtrack and talk about some alternative methods of creating the illusion that you swallow that first needle. The idea of placing a needle that's loose into your mouth is scary, and it should be. And although my experience has shown me that it's absolutely possible to do this safely, I've spent some time thinking about other ways of creating that illusion, and I'd like to share a couple of those with you. One idea is to get a pincushion. It's a cupcake. You can see that I have a few needles here. I'm going to take one. And apparently swallow it. However, of course, I never even removed it. It's still right here in the pincushion. So this is very simple. These needles are normal, but instead of removing one, my index finger pushes it straight down into the pincushion. I pretend to remove it, pretend to place it in my mouth, and pretend to swallow it. Easy. Now, if you prefer this method, you would of course use a pincushion that suited your style, although personally, I recommend that you use one that looks like a giant cupcake. So that's an idea using a pincushion. I've also played around with the idea of using invisible thread elastic loops to create a pole. The way it works is you attach one end of an invisible loop to the needle, you safety pin the other end inside your sleeve, you would keep the needle on your sleeve here. When you were ready to perform, you'd stretch that invisible thread all the way up to your fingertips, display the needle. You apparently place it in your mouth, but when you let go of the needle, the invisible thread loop pulls it all the way into your sleeve. Now you can make an argument for either method. I have enough confidence and experience with having a loose needle inside my mouth that that's the one that I choose to use. But if you're going to perform this, use whatever method you're most comfortable with. Remember, the object is to create the illusion of danger. There's a simplicity to this version of the needle swallowing that I really like. One needle is swallowed, a volunteer holds a piece of string, and essentially fishes it out. The story that's presented to the audience is clear and absolutely insane. I hope you enjoy A Single Needle as much as I have. My name is Wayne Houchin. It's been a pleasure. All right, so we are just getting ready to film A Single Needle. I want to point out Dust over here. He's hard at work in the background. He's got the knobs, the headphones on. But if you take a look at what he's really doing. Okay, so this is the interview, page 4 and 5 and 6. Take something. Who cares? It's late. I need a beer. All right, there are knots. I'm now going to thread one needle onto the thread. That's a lot of threads. Oh, what are we filming? Did we just nail that? Yeah, okay.
You know, how did my hair look?
Now this is an important moment in the routine. The audience still doesn't know what's happening. What's happening? In the exact reverse position as it was when I put it in. I do what? Very carefully, I allow the needle to be pulled out of my mouth. That made sense? Are we good? All right. Now, of course, if you prefer this method, you don't have to use a cupcake that looks like a giant pincushion. That was backwards. Now, if you prefer this method, you would, of course, use a pincushion that suited your style, although I must say that 9 out of 10 magicians highly recommend that you use a pincushion that looks like a giant cupcake.
Well, what I'm seeing is that this guy has the most incredible tongue of anybody I've ever seen on the planet.